AUKUS ITAR exemptions on the April 19th deadline. This trilateral partnership, as you know, is key to deterring China. For Chairman Xi is watching, and I believe he's the only one satisfied with this administration's actions. And finally, we are on the brink of a total destabilization in the Middle East. Israel is in the fight for its very existence from the terrorist threat of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. And during their darkest hour, what did this administration do? They turned its back on our ally. President Biden's decision to withhold weapons approved and appropriated by this Congress is tantamount to an arms embargo. This administration is preventing Israel from their final key military objective of taking out the remaining battalions in Rafah. We need to put maximum pressure on Iran and its proxies. By not enforcing energy sanctions, Iran now has over $80 billion in oil revenue. We have appeased the Ayatollah and funded his terror operations, including their ability to attack Israel directly, which they did for the first time in history. By projecting weakness on the world stage, this administration has invited increased aggression. So why is it after this administration came into office that we now have a war in Ukraine, a war in the Middle East, and a potential war in the Indo-Pacific? Why are we limiting our allies' ability to win wars they didn't start? Mr. Secretary, red lines are for our enemies, not for our allies and our friends. You go back to Chamberlain, Churchill, we know that appeasement only invites aggression, conflict, and war. And Churchill proved that to us. And Ronald Reagan taught us peace through strength. I believe it's time that we return to the Ronald Reagan doctrine of peace through strength. And with that, I yield the balance of my time. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are now pleased to have the 71st Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, before us today. Sir, your full statement will be made part of the record, and I ask that you keep your remarks to 5 minutes. And I will strongly encourage, I will enforce a gavel with all members to 5 minutes so that all members can participate in this extremely important hearing. And with that, I now recognize Secretary Blinken for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to you, to Ranking Member Meeks, to all the members of the committee. It's very good to be with you today. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I thank you also for the partnership that we have had to advance American leadership in the world, leadership that is so essential to delivering on the priorities that matter to our people here at home. The need for U.S. global leadership and the need for cooperation, collaboration with allies and partners has never been greater. We have the People's Republic of China that's pursuing military, economic, geopolitical preeminence, challenging our vision for a free, open, secure, and prosperous international order. Russia's committing aggression not only against Ukraine, but against the principles at the heart of the United Nations Charter: territorial integrity, sovereignty, independence, that are the building blocks for global peace and security. In the Middle East, we're standing with Israel in its efforts to ensure that what happened on October 7th never happens again, as we do everything we can to bring to an end the terrible human suffering in Gaza and prevent the conflict from spreading. U.S. leadership is needed to address humanitarian crises elsewhere in the world, including in Sudan, Haiti, other places where millions have been displaced and many have been killed, but also to address global issues that no country can solve alone, including food security, the changing climate, transnational corruption, the fentanyl crisis. But with the support of Congress, we can and we are approaching these challenges from a position of strength. Because of the actions we've taken, the United States is stronger economically, diplomatically, militarily than it was a few years ago. We've made historic investments here at home in our competitiveness, our innovation, our infrastructure. We've renewed alliances, built new ones, secured unprecedented alignment with key partners in Europe and in Asia on the challenges of our time. We've delivered essential aid to Ukraine. In fact, the United States rallied 50 countries around the world to come to Ukraine's defense to make sure it wouldn't be erased from the map, as Vladimir Putin saw it. We've rallied the international community to share the burden. For every dollar that we sent in economic and development assistance, others have collectively invested 3 more. Now, Many doubted whether bipartisan support for Ukraine and other urgent national security priorities could endure. But last month, Congress demonstrated to the world that we will not pull back when you pass President Biden's supplemental budget request by an overwhelming margin. Our investment abroad does not come at the expense of our strength here at home. Far from it. Most of the supplemental, as you know, is being spent here in the United States, building up our defense industrial base, supporting good American jobs. We need to keep up the momentum, and that requires a State Department budget that will fully resource our response to the challenges of this time. The President's FY25 budget, requesting $58.8 billion for the State Department and USAID, does that in two key ways. First, it funds the essential missions of our department and USAID. The budget will ensure that the United States continues to be the partner of choice for countries to turn to when they need to solve big problems that also affect our own security and economic well-being. In an era of renewed great power competition, we have to be able to present the strongest possible offer, one that is relevant and responsive to countries' needs, and one that advances our security and economic interests. That's why, among other things, we're requesting $2 billion for a new fund to build high-quality, sustainable infrastructure around the world. Crucially, investments like these create good jobs here in America. They expand markets for our businesses overseas. We're requesting resources for the World Bank. With $1 billion in U.S. funding, we can unlock another $36 billion in development fund capacity to direct to the top priorities of emerging economies. That's an enormous return on our own investment and essential for competing with China around the world. The budget also includes $1.7 billion for international organizations, including the UN, APEC, the Inter-American Development Bank, to help shape them in ways that reflect our interests and values. We're asking for $500 million to give more people around the world access to secure internet, digital technologies. Doing so will support our own economy through the export of technology products that are made here in the United States. It will help ensure that we and our fellow democracies remain the leaders and standard bearers when it comes to new, key technologies like artificial intelligence. The budget includes funding to address global issues that affect the lives and livelihoods of the American people, as well as people around the world, especially the synthetic drug crisis. It also funds our response to irregular migration, global food insecurity, public health, climate and energy security, problems that may be taking place in other parts of the world, but we know that what happens on the far end of the world will come back to bite us if it's not addressed and addressed effectively, including with our engagement and leadership. We're also asking Congress to fully fund the State Department's educational and cultural exchanges. They're one of the best, most cost-effective tools that we have for advancing our values and our interests around the world. They support students, researchers, young professionals from our communities who study and work abroad. We also need to guard against attempts by our competitors to spread disinformation and misinformation around the world. Our Global Engagement Center is critical. It's a critical tool for countering the threat of information manipulation by China, by Russia, and others, and we urge you to extend its sunset clause before it goes into effect in the coming months. To outcompete our rivals, we need to invest in the foundation of our strength abroad, and that's our diplomatic corps. That's the second pillar of the budget. The budget makes a strong investment in expanding our overseas presence, opening new posts in the Pacific Islands, the Eastern Caribbean. It will also continue our modernization of American diplomacy. We've reorganized the department to make sure that it can be fit for purpose for the challenges of this time, whether that comes to dealing with new technologies, whether that comes to dealing with global health, climate, dealing with China. We are making the necessary investments to try to attract and retain the most talented workforce possible. We're investing in our people in Washington, at our posts overseas, with training, with technology. We're promoting more agility, innovation, efficiency in our processes. Last year's enacted budget, Mr. Chairman, represented a 5% cut from the year before. And that challenges our efforts to deliver the results that Congress and the American people deserve. So, we urge you to support this budget, which helps us address the most pressing foreign policy priorities of our time and lays the foundation for continued strong American engagement and leadership in the years ahead. With that, I thank you and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me ask first, we, as you know, have been conducting an investigation to the Afghanistan withdrawal, and we'll be releasing a report of that in September. Will you commit to appearing before this committee for a hearing on Afghanistan? We've had the top brass of the Pentagon do so, and I think the Gold Star families deserve that as well.
Mr. Chairman, for the Gold Star families, for the President, for me, for everyone involved. We grieve with them, the losses they've suffered, including over 20 years in Afghanistan. We honor their sacrifice. And one of the ways we do that, of course, is by taking part in oversight, answering questions, giving the American people the answers they deserve. And we've engaged in very good faith in this. I think by our count, we facilitated transcribed interviews with 15 current or former officials.
Sir, my time is limited, but is
no,
that,
I'll simply say
is that a yes?
Mr. Chairman, I've appeared before this committee 5 times, including one time dedicated solely to Afghanistan, but every time taking questions on Afghanistan. That's more than any of my recent predecessors have done. And
well, we look forward to your testimony in September.
Well, we can have our teams talk about that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yesterday that you denounced the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants against Israel's leaders and committed to working with Congress on a bipartisan basis to find an appropriate response. I've been working with the Speaker and the ranking member and others in the Senate on potential proposed legislation to address this issue. Will you commit to working with this committee to find a bipartisan bill that would place meaningful sanctions on the International Criminal Court?
Mr. Chairman, first, let me say again that decision was totally wrong-headed, and any equivalence that it implied between Hamas and Israel and its leaders was shameful. And we commit to engaging on a bipartisan basis and finding an appropriate response.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. Earlier this month, the President stated on CNN that if Israel conducted a major military operation in Rafah, that, quote, we're not going to supply the weapons and artillery. Is this still the Biden administration's policy? And what specific weapons do you plan to withhold beyond the 2,500-pound bombs?
Well, first, Mr. Chairman, no one's done more than President Biden. No one will do more to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. He was there days after the attack on October 7th, the first president to go to Israel when it was at war and under attack. In the time after that, he made sure that we deployed resources and assets to deter any further aggression against Israel from other quarters, which was very much a threat.
And we all know the history, but are you planning to withhold more weapons?
I'm happy to get to that.
And of course,
it's also important. It's also important to note that when Iran conducted an unprecedented attack, a direct attack for the first time on Israel from Iran,
if Israel invades Rafah, will you withhold more weapons?
We actively took part for the first time ever in Israel's defense and rallied a coalition of countries. When it comes to Rafah,
that doesn't answer my question. Are you going to withhold more weapons?
Come to your question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that. When it comes to Rafah, we've made known for a long time our concerns about a full-on military assault of Rafah, the damage that could do to the civilian population, absent a clear and credible plan to protect it, and also to achieve the results that we in Israel both want, which is to deal effectively and durably with Hamas. And so in that context, particularly with regard to 2,000-pound bombs, which in a dense urban environment can do terrible damage, we've been in discussions with Israel about that particular weapon, and those discussions continue. Those were private discussions. It's unfortunate that it leaked to the press. It did, but those discussions continue, and our concerns about a full-on military assault in Rafah remain. We have other ways of dealing with the challenge posed by Hamas that we believe can be more effective and more durable.
Okay, let me just ask you this. We didn't find out about the withholding of weapons until we saw the president's interview on CNN. Congress was never notified of this decision. We just marked up a bill out of committee that requires advance notification. If you decide to withhold more weapons from Israel, which I would say was the intent of Congress when we passed the supplemental and when I approved these weapons, will you at least give us advance notification?
Mr. Chairman, we've gone out of our way. We've gone well above and beyond in previewing for Congress.
I had no notification, nor did anyone in this committee or Congress until we saw the president on CNN. That's hardly an adequate way to notify Congress. Lastly, Ukraine. We have a really bad situation going on, as you know. This is a sanctuary zone that the Russians have created. And what they're doing is they're lining up all their artillery and rockets and missiles just across the Ukraine border that they then use to attack the Ukrainians. However, your administration and Jake Sullivan have restricted the arms use so that Ukraine cannot defend itself and fire back at Russia. That's why I mandated the ATACMS and the supplemental, the long range, short range, and the HIMARS, that your administration is tying their hands behind their back, not unlike what you're trying to do in Israel. Will you change this policy so Ukraine can fight without one hand tied behind its back?
Well, as you know, we've rallied 50 countries over the last 2 years to come to Ukraine's defense, to provide it with the weapons it needs to defend itself, to push back against Russian aggression. When it comes to enabling, endorsing attacks outside of Ukraine, that's not something we've done, but Ukraine will have to make and will make its own decisions, and I want to make sure it gets the equipment that it needs.
Well,
to
you know,
effectively
Congress
defend itself.
got them the equipment, and thank you for implementing that, but Congress did not put restrictions on the use of these weapons. It's Jake Sullivan and your administration that has put the restrictions on these weapons, and I talked to them, and this is not, they cannot achieve victory with these restrictions that you, not the Congress, have placed on them. And I hope you'll take that back to the National Security Advisor and the National Security Council and change this policy decision that is very dangerous and damaging to the Ukrainian people. My time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here and presenting your budget request, which I strongly support. Dr. Afridi did more for America than any other foreigner in the last 200 years. Yet he remains in jail in Pakistan. All Americans are dedicated to his release, but some not dedicated enough to agree with Pakistan for a Afridi-Siddiqui trade. And I would hope that you would urge the administration to make such a trade. I'm confident the Pakistanis would accept it. Obviously, the Pakistanis should release him without conditions. But no, it's very hard to ask any other non-American to cooperate with the United States when the person who did the most for us remains in jail. I hope you would also direct the U.S. ambassador to Albania to visit Camp Ashraf and demonstrate our continued concern for those who fled Iran and then fled Iraq. This is particularly relevant because President Raisi of Iran died, and while some mourn his passing, he was personally responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Iranians, including many who are the family members of those who are in Camp Ashraf. 30,000 people apparently have died in Gaza. Perhaps half or more are civilians. Congress has provided you with $9.1 billion in humanitarian aid. But there's other things going on around the world. 300,000 died in Darfur 2 decades ago, and now we see a new genocide in Darfur where tens of thousands have been killed. Looking at the rest of Sudan, 18 million people face acute food insecurity. 600,000 Tigrayans have died just in the last few years, and now millions of people face food insecurity in Ethiopia. In eastern Congo, we see 7.1 million people displaced. 1.2 million Rohingya are in camps in Bangladesh, where countries have not contributed enough for their food, and therefore the World Food Program has reduced rations by 30%. The entire population of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, has been ethnically cleansed and now lives as refugees in Armenia. Can you commit that, and hopefully this is just a yes-no answer, can you commit that when you allocate that $9.1 billion of humanitarian aid, you will do so on the basis of where is the greatest need rather than which conflicts get the most publicity?
Yes.
Thank you. People think that the Middle East is as bad as it can possibly be. That's not true. Iran has a nuclear weapons program I'm sure my colleagues will ask you about. I want to focus on Saudi Arabia. Some think Ben Salman's going to be a good friend to the United States, but even they must take the examples from the 1970s where the Shah was a friend of the United States, and every weapon system that he had was in the hands of the Ayatollahs by the end of that decade. Saudi Arabia will want a nuclear cooperation agreement with the United States. Can you commit to us that you will not send up to Congress a nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia that does not include the additional protocol and does not meet the gold standard that we saw in the UAE nuclear cooperation agreement?
Any nuclear cooperation agreement that we reach will have to address all of our nonproliferation goals, and we want to make sure that, of course, we have gold standard agreements with whomever we reach these agreements.
Thank you. Hamas had allied organizations. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the better known, but there is also the Popular Resistance Committees, the third biggest terrorist organization based in Gaza, which has not been designated a foreign terrorist organization. And I wonder if you can commit to either designating them as either an FTO or otherwise as a terrorist organization, such as a specially designated global terrorist, or at least come back to this committee in 30 days and tell us why you haven't done so.
Happy to come back to you. We're always looking to see appropriate designations to use whatever tools we can against terrorist organizations.
They are proud participants in the killing of 1,200 of Israelis on October 7th, and they've killed Americans. They meet more than all the standards.
Gentleman's time has expired, and I'm going to recognize Mr. Smith for 5 minutes. Then we will recess for 10 minutes. We have 2 votes on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Friday, Mr. Secretary, I chaired my 4th congressional hearing within the year on UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency, and its decades-long complicity in the most vicious forms of anti-Semitic hate, with a focus on the so-called independent UN review by Ms. Catherine Colonna. I've read her report very carefully, and our witnesses, including the former General Counsel, James Lindsay. He was the General Counsel for UNRWA, and he admonished us in the strongest terms, do not give money to UNRWA. He used to be their guy. Now he's not. Hillel Neuer, who's the Executive Director of UN Watch, testified and said the Colonna review was not independent. The verdict was determined in advance, and he pointed out all of the conflicts of interest of the people, the players. It was very narrowly focused, too focused, just on October 7th, and even there it whitewashed. In fact, the only thing that came out of it that was any good was to say that UNRWA does not vet employees for connections or sympathies with Hamas or Islamic Jihad, quote, unquote. 21 years ago, in 2003, I offered an amendment to redirect the money away from UNRWA to other entities that could be vetted to ensure non-anti-Semitism. This year, my legislation, the Stop UNRWA Act, Stop Support for UNRWA Act of 2024, was passed by this committee. It completely prohibits any U.S. contributions to UNRWA. It made clear, however, that nothing in the act may be construed to preclude the provision of humanitarian assistance through any agency or entity, long as you certify, Mr. Secretary, that it doesn't promote, espouse, or affiliate with entities or individuals that promote violence or terrorism or anti-Semitism, and does not employ individuals who promote, espouse, or affiliated with such entities or individuals. Then, in March, the bipartisan foreign aid bill made it absolutely clear no funds for UNRWA. Both sides of the aisle, both House and Senate, and that's until March 25th, 2025. My question is, are U.S. taxpayer funds to UNRWA still paused? Secondly, that's the other funds that were already in the pipeline or may be coming in from other spigots. Secondly, can you assure the committee that the Biden administration's investigation will be in-depth, a top-to-bottom review? From the moment your administration announced it and when the UN announced it, I said, they do such a narrow look, they're not going to see much. They'll know that 12 to 18 people committed atrocities, but unfortunately, UNRWA has been a child abuse factory, turning little wonderful kids who happen to be Palestinian into child soldiers by inculcating in them hatred towards Jews and to Jerusalem and to the Jewish state. So please, about your report, when's that coming? And hopefully it will be very comprehensive.
Thank you. Just a few things on this. First of all, we do support the implementation of the recommendations in the Kelowna report. We think those are important and important to move forward with them. Second, there is a separate investigation that's going on. This is a UN internal report on the specific allegations, as you know, about the participation of UNRWA employees in the horrific events of October 7th. We await those results, and we will pull all of that together along with our own hard look at this. Second, we, of course, are abiding by the law in making sure that funds...
So no other funds are finding their way into...
No other funds can or should be
Is
going to
it planned in the near future?
Nope. And we'll abide by it. Now, I will tell you, we do have a difference in view, because for all of the manifest problems and deficiencies with UNRWA, it's also been playing an absolutely critical and in many ways, at least in the near term, irreplaceable role in terms of being able to provide assistance for people who desperately need it. It has an infrastructure that no one else has. It has people that no one else has. So there needs to be a way to make sure, one way or another, that assistance gets to people who desperately need it. And so we can look at what can be done for the future. But in the near term, I've got to tell you, we still see that as essential. But no, we are not and will not provide the funding pursuant to the law.
Let me ask you, if I could, on child abduction, international child abduction, and I've written a major law on it named after David Goldman. When the president of Japan was here, I gave him a letter asking him to get engaged. I would ask the administration, I would ask the president, you know, we all speak out on behalf, and he met with people, Japanese who have been abducted to North Korea, but the big concern is, what about our own children who have been abducted, 500 of them to Japan? And finally, the World Health Assembly is meeting. They're violating their own rules about procedure. Are you going to submit the WHO pandemic treaty, which is rife with problems, to the Senate for ratification?
Thank you. On child abduction, I'm, like you, seized with this. And for a long time, I applaud what you're doing and your leadership on this. And when we have countries that are not abiding by the Hague Convention or are otherwise engaging in practices that are keeping children away from their parents, this is something we take action on, and I always welcome working with you on that. Second, and very quickly, on the pandemic agreement, the way things stand right now, I don't see that coming to a conclusion in the near term. There's just not consensus on it. It's something we continue to work on, but continue to work on making sure that we uphold our own interests and values, including on, for example, intellectual property.
Committee will take a short recess for 2 votes on the floor.
Yeah.